Welcome to Future², the podcast all about corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you authors, corporate innovation managers, entrepreneurs, and above all else, thought leaders on the topics of innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement. Future² brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you successfully navigate your innovation journey. Every Monday, I'll bring you a world-class thought leader such as Steve Blank, Alex Osterwalder, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, or Whitney Johnson, just to name a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you some quick, digestible insights myself to help end your week on a high before you head off for the weekend. Future² is proudly brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub, school, and consultancy that works with large organizations to help them adopt the mindset, methodologies, and tools required to explore new business models and disruptive innovation in an era of rapid change. If your organization needs support coming up with ideas, testing and turning those ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit Collective Campus online at www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future². Today I'll be speaking with Angela Maiers. She's been creating and leading change in education and enterprise for 25 years, teaching every level of school from kindergarten to graduate school and consulting with companies around the world. She's the author of 6 books, including Classroom, Habitudes, and The Passion-Driven Classroom, and her You Matter talk at TEDxDesMoines has been viewed several 100,000 times. Angela is the founder of Choose to Matter, a global movement that challenges and inspires students to work collaboratively to develop innovative solutions to social problems. Today, Angela is at the forefront of new literacy and Web 2.0 technologies. An active blogger and social media evangelist, she's deeply committed to helping learners understand the transformational power of technology. Her intimate knowledge of teaching and learning, down-to-earth style, and powerful message of personal empowerment have made her a highly sought-after keynote speaker and a vibrant, courageous voice in both the business and education space. So with that, I'm very excited to bring you the one, the only Angela Maiers. Welcome to the show, Angela.
Hi, how are you? I'm so honored to be here.
Oh, well, I'm so honored to have you on the program. And you're joining us all the way from sunny Colorado?
Yes, it's amazingly sunny right now. The weather's been so strange, like there's winter when it should be spring. But yes, it's incredibly sunny and beautiful today.
Fantastic. Yeah, we recently had Neil Robertson, who you may be familiar with on our podcast. And, you know, he's quite the accomplished entrepreneur and investor, and he's from Boulder, Colorado, which I learned it's got quite a thriving tech and innovation ecosystem. And I had absolutely no idea that Boulder, Colorado had anything of the sort, and I know you're from Castle Rock, which is a small town.
Yes.
You guys are about. You guys are about 30 k's outside of Denver, right?
Yeah, yep. And I've just moved here about 8 months ago, so I'm from Iowa. All of my life, so I'm just getting to know the Denver sort of entrepreneur tech startup community.
Right.
So I'm definitely going to connect with Neil. And I'm just sort of learning this space. I went to my first networking event this week because I have been traveling so much that I'm just learning Colorado, and I'm not here enough to actually learn it. So my daughter's going to Boulder next year, so I'm excited. Boulder's just an amazing, beautiful city, but that's good to know that's got a startup feel to it.
Yeah. Apparently it's got the big startup feel, and people just, there's a lot of serendipity apparently at a lot of the cafes where you could be just sitting a table away from a VC who's sitting a table away from a big startup founder and all sorts of stuff. Just lots of, collaborative connections forged in these cafes of Colorado, I guess.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I call that tactical serendipity.
Tactical.
Because it isn't just, letting luck take over. It's being very tactical about positioning yourself, not being shy, honoring anyone in your presence, listening to their story. And there's always a connection, but there's no expectation of a connection. It's just complete tactical openness for magic to happen. So that's awesome.
No, I love that approach. And speaking of tactical serendipity, you're a passionate educator, Angela, with more than 25 years experience leading change in education across every level from kindergarten right through to large enterprise. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit about the backstory of how you came to be such a passionate educator?
I think spending almost a decade around 5-year-olds. and not realizing how differently they see the world that helps you see a lens of the world, and you just sort of think that everybody sees the world that way, and you operate with such a community collaborative mindset that's so natural and it's so pure. They're what I call habitudes. They're habits and mindsets, their way of seeing the world and their place in it. And it wasn't until I left that space and started moving up the grade levels and started seeing, you always hear about, tragedies in education, but that tragedy is that we're losing that 5-year-old spirit that the world needs, their curiosity and their passion and their entire embodiment of values. And it is rapidly just being sucked out. Like the soul is being sucked out of not just kids, but teachers at mass scale. And it's pandemic, and it affects, and then now moving into the work at the work, with the workforce, then you just look at if people knew what learning could be, what innovation could be, they would never stop being that 5-year-old self.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
I think that's where it all started. Everything I learned in kindergarten or around kindergarten.
Well, I think adults have a lot to learn from 5-year-olds, particularly when it comes to creativity and just embracing the impossible. And I guess to that point, and I think you've kind of touched on it there, many of today's leaders have grown up in an environment of avoiding failure at all costs, extreme risk mitigation, and chasing short-term goals, which ultimately inhibits innovation. Innovation is all about embracing ambiguity, risk-taking, and chasing those longer-term returns. And we've got people out there like Elon Musk, like Jeff Bezos, and thousands of lesser-known names that are heading up smaller companies, making a real impact on the world. But, the vast majority of GDP, of capital expenditure is still chewed up by large companies who perhaps haven't come along to this new way of thinking yet, and still avoid risk, avoid failure, and so on. So to that degree, obviously the world can benefit from more people thinking a little bit more like your Elon Musks of the world. But are these character traits something that can be taught, or are entrepreneurs and innovators born?
I think that innately those astute elements, what I continue to call habitudes, because they're both habit, because they're practiced daily and discipline set. I think those attributes of curiosity and the ability to embrace risk and problem solve and create, that those are in and exist in all of us, and that we're schooled out of them, and I don't mean just schooled by formal education, I mean schooled by the world in a redefinition of what success is. But I definitely believe that we can create the conditions for those to re-exist. And so that's really where it is our mindset at first about what innovation is. And I think that most of the reason that innovation fails is because we fail to understand what it is and how to create the conditions for innovation to exist. And so I define innovation as an invitation to share your genius with the world, from the world. And by world, I mean it could be 5 people sitting next to you in a cafe, or it could be the entire 5.5 billion people in the world. And so that requires a lot of fundamental mind shifts. It requires a belief that you actually have something worthy to share with the world, and an embodiment that you have a responsibility to do that, an astuteness of how to gather people who can help you do that. So if you look at how that happens, it really happens naturally in a sandbox. When I first started working on my dissertation, I created this concept called the Sandbox Manifesto, and I visited 11 sandboxes across 11 different countries in the world. And I literally just went in and sat and then recorded the behaviors, whether it was the natives, everywhere from Dubai to Hawaii to the middle of a sandbox in Iowa.
Yep.
And the principles of a sandbox are the principles of an innovative environment, because there's constraints, that it isn't just free for all, that the ability to contribute is innate. All of those things are these sort of universal rules. Those are those conditions for innovation to occur. And schools have not only failed to be diligent about recreating those conditions, they have created conditions that are the antithesis of that. Like you're talking about a place where curiosity doesn't subside, and where passion is seen as an irritation, or it's not on the agenda. So I believe in the sense that innovation, not necessarily that innovation can taught, but we can teach entire organizations or a single classroom to build the conditions for innovation to be inevitable.
And so I guess some of those conditions then, Angela, I think you've mentioned a couple there where you have constraints, small teams, I guess, that are constantly experimenting, embracing ambiguity, challenging the status quo, and I guess an environment where people are forced or maybe encouraged to network and meet different people from different backgrounds.
Absolutely. Envisioning, dreaming, imagination's a huge part of innovation.
Yeah.
Understanding and validating and encouraging dreaming instead of discouraging it. I'm so interested to see, so Australia's been on my bucket list for a long, long time. And my background is literacy, linguistics, and neuroscience. So a lot of those principles came from New Zealand and Australian classrooms in terms of literacy, culture, language. So I have not actually been in direct contact with Australian schools. So I'm interested to see if the sort of beating out curiosity and passion happens at the same scale it does with U.S. schools as it does Australian schools. Yeah,
we've got a problem in Australia that people refer to as tall poppy syndrome. So people that excel are more or less cut down by society or pointed fingers at. So the whole some of the characteristics that underpin entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs in general is, they're self-promoters, they'll take big bets, they'll embrace what's impossible, but generally those types of behaviors are frowned upon in our society, just because I think we have a lot of the remnants of a very conservative society coming, I suppose, harking back to our colonial history, being part of the Commonwealth, and some of those conservative values are still with us today. But that is changing slowly but surely. However, I think we still have a long way to go when it comes to transforming education in this country.
It makes me so sad. You're supposed to say, no, it's so different here.
Well, yeah.
No, but I appreciate the honesty, because we've got to fix this. And I don't believe that education is capable of fixing it. I do believe that people inside of the system, if these conditions are created outside the system, can disrupt it from the inside out. And that's actually what I've been a huge part of for the last 3 years, is to watch this movement grow from the inside out at the grassroots level, where we're not trying to fix education, we're not trying to reform it, we're just creating new conditions within the existing structure. And actually the constraints of that existing structure actually foster greater innovation to be not so incremental and even more disruptive.
Yeah, and I think, Australia is probably not that different to most developed economies when it comes to education, because I think our education system is still built upon, the industrial age. It's all about building people to execute upon certain set procedure, whether it's accounting, law, and so on. However, the world is moving at a pace that's far beyond what it's moved at before, and as a result of that, we're seeing more than 50% of jobs up for automation in the next 10 to 15 years alone, which means many of these traditional roles will be replaced. And I recently interviewed Brian Christian, who wrote the book The Most Human, which was a New York Times bestseller, and it was all about artificial intelligence, right? And the ability to simply execute procedure will more or less be the domain of computers, and we need people to be able to think critically, to network, to collaborate, to come up with new novel solutions. I think those are the types of skills that will put today's children in good stead tomorrow.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely, 1,000% agree.
So I guess you've talked about creating, I suppose, changing the conditions at a lot of these schools or in our entrenched educational systems, but What do you have any thoughts on in terms of the curriculum itself changing in some way, shape, or form?
In terms of innovation, there are definitely curricular elements, but innovation is not an event. Mm-hmm. It is something that you embody and experience. Yep. So curriculum has to be that. Curriculum is not the answer to leadership, and I don't believe curriculum is the answer to innovation. You cannot go take a 6-week course on innovation. And yet there's curricular elements, like you are I was just digging in deeply to your resources on, agile startup and lean startup and just, how to pitch an investor and all mm-hmm. of those things. So there are supports, but they come at a very important time when that mindset is embodied. And that's the thing. Innovation is so much more about culture than it is curriculum. Unfortunately, education is about content and curriculum, and culture, if it's even discussed, is sort of like a fringe benefit. And that's the big thing that has to shift. Unless you shift the culture and create these conditions and these very specific environments for these innovation capacities to emerge, then the curriculum doesn't really matter. So like my son, for example, in college, believe it or not, it's just mm-hmm. such a joke, took an entrepreneurial class in college. He had to create a fake business plan for a product that doesn't exist, with no knowledge of how to network or how to pitch the product. Like, so everything is in this simulated bubble, and there's no authenticity to it. And our sort of obsession about blocking the web means we're blocking these opportunities to be able to network, to be able to have real world context, to share, mm-hmm. like I said, innovation is an invitation to share your genius, your idea to leave the world better off than you found it with people actually in the world. You mm-hmm. cannot recreate that. You can't fake that or simulate that. And yet there's curriculum that can support that with a real world context.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I've got so many thoughts buzzing in my head on the back of that. And one that particularly came out was something you said earlier about, the conditions need to exist first, and then you can provide them with the tools to actually innovate. And, that's something which is 2,000 years old. I mean, you can trace that back to Plato. Plato used to say to his students, no philosophy before 30 because you're not ready yet. Once you've gone through hardship, we can give you the tools to better understand life. But until you actually really, really want those tools, they're useless, right? So it's the same thing. You want to create the conditions where people want those tools. So that's sort of a very interesting take on it. So I guess to that extent, changing education, I think there's so many, tentacles when it comes to education. Obviously the conditions, and once you get the conditions right, some of that curricular stuff. But also, kids go through school, they're still told the story that go to school, get an education, get into college, get good marks, get a good job, climb the corporate ladder. But the world is changing very quickly. And, we've seen recently, Ernst & Young in the UK have basically dropped degrees as a prerequisite. They've said, look, we will still look favorably upon them, but it's not a be-all, end-all. So, what role do you think employers have to play in this changing educational landscape?
So I have two things about that. I'm going to send you this article that I just did for the Huffington Post called Turning Tides. So 144 of the nation's most elite universities, from MIT to Harvard to Yale to Stanford to Wake Forest, all came together under not the pretext of just simply academics, but as a mental health crisis, and said, this is at a level of a mental health issue, not an academic or education issue. We are putting so much stress on these scores, on these tests, on this prep, on all the things that you do to get into one of our colleges, and none of it translates into successful, not just college experience, but workforce experience. And so they made a statement, again, not that they would say, oh, it's terrible that you got a 4.0, but they are putting a different emphasis on test scores, on SAT, on ACT, on, what your score is, what courses you took, and emphasizing more character and passion and experience, and most importantly, contribution. And so that's a major statement. And yet, by the time that truly disrupts schools, where, like when I share this with thousands and thousands of leaders, like they're hearing it for the first time. This is not a surprise. This has been on the horizon. You've seen businesses move from, saying we're not even going to actually even recruit people who have degrees because it's too hard to unschool them from all the bad habits they've learned. I think the tides are turning, but they're not turning quick enough. So the disruption has to happen from the inside out. And I really believe that we have tapped into that disruption and that structure that allows this to happen at scale. And I'm really excited to share that with you. And I don't know if it's the right time or not, so I don't want to interrupt your flow.
No, it's all good, and I look forward to reading that. And I guess I recently had the privilege of watching Tony Wagner's latest documentary, Most Likely to Succeed. And there was a particular scene in that documentary where high school students were asked whether they want to learn how to think critically and learn skills that can put them in a better place in life or a better position to succeed, or whether they just want to learn how to pass the test to get into college. Right. And, it was unanimous. The kids just wanted to pass the test because that's the story they've been told. But what was interesting in that documentary was that the schools, I believe it was High Tech High, they're all about project-based work, where you're working collaboratively with other people, solving problems, and then rather than a test, you have an exhibition where you demonstrate your solutions. So, what's your take on project-based work as a method of evaluating students as opposed to fact-based recall and standardized testing?
I think in terms of critical thinking, that a project always trumps that, depending if the project is authentic and challenging. I do not think it is enough. And so I am trying to differentiate between project-based learning and passion-driven, purpose-driven learning. And that, I think there's a very subtle but fundamental difference. And what I've seen, that even with the successes of project-based learning, what they don't emphasize in most schools, that was my, if you would say, criticism of the documentary. I'm a huge fan of Tony Wagner, and what he's saying is spot on. But I think when you show schools like High Tech High, or that are fully project-based, the ability for teachers to disconnect to that at scale and say, well, they can do that because they're High Tech High, or they can do that because they've got freedom. There's a lot of buts that can be seen because they're so out there. They're such outliers, schools like that it's not going to disrupt at scale the institution of education. But if you pull apart those projects and you look at those conditions that you just mentioned, where there's a real world problem to solve, where kids are asked to collaboratively figure out solutions to that problem, where they're expected to exhibit, they're expected to show whatever they either created or solved to an audience, a bigger audience than their teacher, their school. Those are the conditions that we can standardize. So what gets lost in that is the projects get the most attention, and not the process, and not the recreation of that process at scale. And that's why you have these incremental examples of innovation, a pocket here, a High Tech High here, a High Tech High, and millions of dollars go into these schools when those conditions are nearly free to create in every school. And that's what I'm trying to do at scale, is be able to create those conditions, whether you're a very small school in the middle of a cornfield, or in the middle of the bush in Australia, or in downtown Philadelphia, wherever it is, that you don't have to be a High Tech High, that you don't have to go all in. It's not a matter of having funding or technology, because these are shifts in mindset not shifts in skill set or shifts in tech sets.
Yeah, and I draw parallels between what you've just said and corporate innovation. Oftentimes, you've got people within large companies who want to innovate, but they feel as if, they're lower down the food chain, they have no influence, and unless senior management says something needs to be done and allocates money towards something being done, they just don't take matters into their own hands. But there are examples of bottom-up innovation in many companies where I've got a great example of Australia Post, where a team of agile developers basically started running their own hackathons after hours, where they tried to solve some company problems, and they put these solutions in front of some of the decision makers, and now they've basically got a funded hackathon that takes place every month where people from across the organization can come along and take part. And it's about showing rather than telling, and that way you can start to get buy-in for doing things differently and setting up these conditions. So I guess to that point, we do have we do have a lot of people that are, like you said, setting up spot fires or little pockets of innovation. And likewise, we run I mentioned we run a 2-day program called Lemonade Stand, which is all about teaching kids, 9 to 12-year-olds, those lean startup fundamentals. And I guess we've had some critics who seem to think that this is causing kids to grow up too quickly, despite an overwhelmingly positive response from students and parents. What do you say to critics who think that teaching kids about business or innovation is causing them to grow up too fast?
I say talk to your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And really understand how different this generation is. I've been in education 28 years, and I've always been in awe of kids. I already said I learned everything I know about anything, the web, innovation, just life from 5-year-olds. But what is so fundamentally different about this generation, there's 2 things that make them different. The first is that they are the only generation that have grown up and have been educated in the age of possibility, where impossible is defied every 140 characters. It is not a random example. It is not a once-in-a-lifetime example where there's a man on the moon and the earth and the world stops because we put a man on the moon. Every 140 characters, something impossible is being defied by someone. And not just the typical someone's, not a company by a 14-year-old or a 10-year-old over here or a company. So the idea about embracing the impossible, it's just like breathing to them. And that is very difficult for even the most innovative people among us. We have a memory, we have a history of when something was truly impossible. They have no history. You couple that with them being the most connected generation and identified by community. They are building communities online very early. So the idea of the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle where you hear about a tragedy halfway across the world, that is about a 3rd degree of separation from someone they know. These are not any longer these things that say, oh, those poor people in, Australia, look at what happened to them. Those are people in their network. So they have become the most compassionate generation, the most connected generation that absolutely believes it is their birthright to make an impact in the world. And I think you found this same grade level. This is a generation that hasn't been named yet. This is not the millennials. These are not graduating seniors. These are 8-year-olds to 13-year-olds, and they are an extremely different generation than the world has seen. And that's really who's fueling our movement, who's fueling Choose to Matter, who's fueling this disruptive innovation at a scale and a velocity that I've never, ever seen before in 28 years of working with kids and working with organizations.
Yeah, you've touched on a number of great points there, and I recently interviewed Ted Rubin, who likes to call it...
Oh, I love Ted so much.
Yeah, he's awesome. We actually sent him some happy socks as well for appearing on the podcast, so hashtag Ted Socky for people who want to check that out, but He calls this the age of influence, right? Where, kids are just so connected and can do almost anything from the comfort of their own bedrooms with a bit of tact. They have access to more information than the President of the United States had in the mid-90s. It's absolutely crazy. And I think you're right.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's insane. Barriers to entry for anyone wanting to start a business, in particular kids, have gone down from, millions about 20 years ago to a few $100 today.
Right.
The barriers to entry are just so low, the playing field is so even. And I guess today's kids, as you've alluded to, they are at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at least in developed economies, where they are looking for purpose over profit, and they're looking to be fulfilled. So what do you think? I think people with that sort of mindset in 10 or 20 years, when they're in leadership roles, they can play a profound role on impacting not just Western economies, but also developed economies.
Absolutely. They are playing profound roles right now. They're leading right now. So the structure that we built inside of schools, I wrote a book, and this was 4 years ago, that I shared this research with the education community. It takes them about 4 to 5 years to sort of embrace fully what I'm saying. And so I studied organizations, everyone from Google to FedEx to every structure of the innovation, or the companies that are succeeding in this space, and peeled down what those conditions were. So Google probably had the most famous model with this 20% time. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, very familiar.
So I made the case to my community. What? First of all, why are we not doing this? And I'm not saying that it needs to be 20% of the school time. So what if we tested this out and did it for 1 hour a week? And so I had 6 graduate students at that time at the university, and I asked them to take it on as their research. So because of social media, they blogged about it, they shared their experience. We did a couple online courses. We named it Genius Hour. So 1 hour a week, kids were asked to use their genius, and just like Google, you can connect with anybody that you want. You can access any genius in the school, in the community, but it has to forward what's happening in the community or forward what's happening in the world, not having any idea what the scope would be. So in the span of 2 years, Genius Hour has moved from 6 classrooms to 60,000 classrooms in 100 countries.
Wow.
And so as this was happening at a speed that I didn't quite comprehend, the same time that the book was finally taking hold and Genius Hour was reaching a tipping point where it's now a concept that you can ask in multiple schools and people are familiar with it. The talk that I did for TED came out. Underneath Genius Hour goes back to what I believe the core condition of innovation, or I guess significance, to happen is the belief that you actually have something, that you are as capable as somebody that is taller and richer and every other thing that we say that we can't do something for, and that you have an equal obligation to impact the world, that you matter, and your actions, even the smallest of action, count. And when those two forces merge together, the concept of mattering and the concept of contributing your genius, the movement Choose to Matter started. And so for the last year and a half, I followed the movement live, where I Howard live, and it was just sort of a random occurrence, almost a mistake, where I went to a school in Philadelphia, and I was going to go to different grade levels to see Genius Hour in action because the projects coming in from Genius Hour were phenomenal. And we couldn't decide where I was going to go. So I'm like, well, the whole school's genius. I believe that. So what if we leveraged our collective genius? What if we pooled the collective genius of these 550 kids, and we have about a day and a half together and see what we can do? What could we do together if we believed everyone in the room had a contribution to make, and that the smartest person in the room was the room? And so we had no idea what that would turn into, and it fundamentally disrupted what my potential or idea of innovation was. That the reason we're not innovating is because we are not leveraging the collective genius in our presence, because we're so worried about competing with each other. So that experience we replicated 9 different times. And in 9 different cultures, from inner city LA to the middle of a cornfield in Iowa, with different grade levels. Our largest event was 6,544 K through 12 students. The most miraculous thing about watching this community emerge, to literally pull together, to leverage their collective genius toward the world's most wicked challenges, everything from healthcare to education to environmental sustainability to economic development. It was mind-boggling, the kind of problems that they tackled, was that no adults were involved, that not a single adult was involved, that it was created, it was marketed, it was organized, it was ran, and it was led by a volunteer force of students who showed up the night before. And all we did was demonstrate our innovation process, which I think is unique, because instead of asking kids at any level to follow their passions, to find happiness, I believe that is the wrong direction. Even though I believe passion is absolutely necessary for anything significant to happen, I do not think it ignites innovation at the level we're talking about. So we asked kids, instead of following your heart, follow the heartbreak until you find where your heart is needed. So we created a design process called heartbreak mapping, where if you said that you loved animals, your job would be to research what is heartbreaking about what's happening to animals in your world. And then as you map that heartbreak, 2 things happen. You either encountered an individual or an organization mending that heartbreak that you joined forces with to bring a different perspective, or you found a gap and you filled that gap with your genius, with your community, with the network that you recruited. And we did this within the constraint of 48 hours. So it was like almost like a hackathon meets social innovation meets social good, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen happen in my world to date.
Wow. I don't know where to start responding to that. You've said so many amazing things and so many things that I can relate to. I think that what you said about follow the heartbreak, I mean, we ask our students a question. Don't ask what you want to be. Don't ask kids what they want to be when they grow up. Ask them what problem they want to solve, right? It's such an important question, and it's so true. I mean, at least a third of the ideas that come through our Lemonade Stand program pertain to socially conscious ventures, whether it's ending poverty, environmental issues, healthcare, etc., poverty. I think kids are way more attuned to empathy and human struggle than perhaps many adults are, who, you mentioned earlier about, where I guess it was kind of talking about the fear-based mindset and not wanting to make mistakes, not wanting to look bad, wanting to look better than the other person. And that fear-based mindset keeps us back, right? Because it stops us from taking risks that may make us look bad. And I guess kids haven't developed that yet. They don't, well, I guess it depends on what age, but generally they're more willing to take risks. They're not shame-based, they're not fear-based or fear-driven, and therefore they come up with these great ideas. So I guess to that extent, I mean, I think I'm sure there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, adults out there who've stumbled upon books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Carol Dweck's Mindset, and it's probably changed the game for them. So, I mean, what role do you think these books or this literature or these philosophies have in I suppose children's education?
I think that it is that knowledge, those books, that curriculum, tied to an authentic purpose. And so the foundation of our movement is one simple sentence: you are a genius and the world needs your contribution. So and I'm not saying that to inspire you. So when I say you're a genius, we define genius as your ability to solve a problem in a way that it has not yet been addressed, your ability to make an impact, or your ability to share your gift in a way that makes the world better than you left it. So it is your moral obligation to find what it is that you're going to contribute, but it's in the active contribution that you are changed. It's being called upon. So the deepest level of mattering is essentialness. So when someone needs you, that is far more powerful to drive action than even someone loving you. People can be loved and stay on the couch. People that are needed take action. They jump through fire. They run into burning buildings, because when you're essential, and that's what we're tapping into with Choose to Matter, we're tapping into the DNA level need to be needed by another person. No one is motivated by being seen as needy, by they might be temporarily pacified by a handout or by support, but the ultimate motivation and the ultimate driver to find your passion is when either you are asking to surrender to your own heartbreak and pull yourself up, or you're surrendering to the heartbreak of something bigger. And so there's no, we don't have to engage kids. We don't have to innovate. We've done all of this work with Post-it notes and butcher paper and the live web, because it is in the recruitment of other people and the telling of your story, which is almost always based in a deep heartbreak. It's a deep motivator. It's where you find out your extraordinary powers is not during, I just say to kids, your genius needs a reason to show up. And in school, 99.99% of the time, we are not giving genius a reason to show up. You've got to light a house on fire for people to get up and out of their comfort zone and stop worrying on whether they're good at putting out fires, and they just run in and they put it out. And so that's what we do. We light a fire by exposing the heartbreaks of the world to kids and show them, prove to them in real time, you are needed by the world. And I very rarely share these stories because they're so personal, but in every live event, and probably the deepest heartbreak for young people right now is suicide. And we have kids that say, I just was with a group of 400 kids in Canada, and one of these little girls, not little girls, but young girls, said, I have been thinking about nothing but killing myself this week. I never felt like I mattered, but when I see how much my gifts are needed by the world, I am choosing, that's why we call it choosing to matter. I'm choosing to matter. And that's very different than choosing to follow someone else's path, or choosing to do just what you like to do or what you're passionate about doing because it forwards you. When you are a part of something that is bigger than yourself, it changes you from the inside out.
And I think, there's science behind this, and, you talked about neuroscience, and behavioral psychologists have also found absolutely. That, intrinsic motivators, mastery, autonomy, and most importantly, purpose. Without purpose, why would you even get up in the morning? And
absolutely,
the suicide thing is a scary fact, and I imagine a lot of that would be influenced by the fact that so many kids today see social media as a surrogate for self-worth and the amount of likes and follows they're getting, and looking at other people's best foot forward on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and ultimately making themselves feel down about their own lives. So I guess giving them so like you said, giving people or showing people that they matter, that they can make a difference, and that they are needed can help reverse that.
I think the most authentic thing that human beings need to be reminded of, not just young children, but human beings need to be reminded daily, sometimes moment by moment. Our most authentic thing is our capacity to create or to overcome, to love, or to transform anything to be greater than our suffering. Because there's no way you get through life, that you get through anything without pain. The root word of passion is to suffer. And that's where true passion comes, when you figure out what's worth suffering for, what's worth fighting for, what's worth taking risks. And that's what we're asking kids to tap into. So going back to the culture thing, in order for this to scale, so it is not just an event or an hour a week, that was just to give kids an experience that's so fundamentally different, an experience to be truly, authentically needed by the world. I just finished a book called Liberating Genius, and it takes you through the process of unleashing your own story, your own heartbreak, the process of transformation, all the way to the process of full contribution. And we're giving the book away free to every school, every parent, every organization. And it is really change-making lessons. Like you said, this is where the books come in. These are lessons from Carol Dweck and lessons from Tony Wagner and lessons from Ted Rubin and lessons from, epic change makers, people like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and everyone else, from the perspective that we can adopt and embody their mindset, their process. And anyone is capable of this. Anyone is capable of overcoming their suffering and being a part of something bigger. And I think that accidentally or from whatever level, that we've stumbled onto something so profound that it has a chance to not only epically disrupt education, but epically disrupt the world.
Wow. And yeah, through difficulty to the stars, I think, is one of my favorite sayings. And I think you've just touched on that there. You need to go through that struggle. And yeah, that's beautiful. And I guess I just wanted to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, talking about technology in the classroom. And I know you use technology as part of the Choose to Matter events that you do, and you use technology to come up with innovative solutions to social problems. Can you perhaps elaborate on how that works and what that looks like?
The most important part of technology that we expose kids to is not access to information. It is access to humanity. It is access to a network that can fundamentally change not only their ability to scale their idea or innovation, but their ability to become the person they never dreamed of being. So we take them through a process we call the creation of our dream team. If you look at disruptors since the beginning of time, the genius of true genius was they stood on the shoulders of other geniuses. Like Albert Einstein had a full life-size picture of Newton above his bed. And on that, he said, we can see further standing on the shoulders of giants. And so we overestimate the access to tools and platforms and underestimate the access to humanity that we have, the unprecedented access. So we are no longer limited by the space or the time or the people that are in our physical lives. We can literally bring anyone to the table to form our dream team. And just like a dream team is chosen in sports, where everyone on the dream team is an asset, but they are an asset for a different reason. You bring somebody in that is a dreamer. You bring somebody in that's a visionary. But if you put a table of visionaries together, nothing would get done. They'd just be dreams. So we teach kids to understand what their unique contribution is and to recruit people deliberately different from them. But you unite under a certain cause or a mission, and true collaboration happens because you have diversity as a mainstay in that collaboration. So the internet gives us that. It also gives us a platform for access to real world problems, to what is happening in real time and being a part of that problem finding and problem solving process. And it gives us a network to sustain the kind of, wherewithal to get through the heartbreaking things of what it takes, whether it's a startup or a business idea, or it is very painful moving a disruptive idea forward. And you need a network that supports you unequivocally to be able to do that. So those are the ways that we use the web to do things that we could not do, to access things that we couldn't access. And that's what's game-changing. It's a driver of new opportunity.
Fantastic. And I think this conversation is a testament to the power of the web. Gone are the days where you needed an elaborate studio setup and, PR team behind you, setting up connections, and it would cost tens of thousands of dollars, whereas now all it takes is an email, a $30, $40 headset, and an internet connection, and it's crazy. And then you can connect with people from the other side of the world who perhaps share your vision or perhaps can help you achieve your vision in some way, shape, or form. So it's incredibly powerful. And I think the tools are there, but it's about coming back to what we mentioned earlier. It's about making people see that the tools are there and making them want to use those tools to achieve some greater mission and to solve the heartbreak they see in the world. And I guess, that wraps up my sort of core questions on education. However, I do have 3 questions, Angela, that I ask all of my guests, and it's a bit of fun. And I'm not sure if you've heard any of my other podcasts, so hopefully you haven't.
I have not.
Excellent. Great. That's good. So this is totally unscripted. Okay, so question number 1 is, if you could work for any company at any stage of their company life cycle, who would it be and why?
I would not work for a company. I would work for a community. I would do exactly what I'm doing right now with this community of young change makers and help them amplify their new vision of what's possible in the world. Because I think that, a big company is a part of just a lot of smaller organizations working, smaller communities working. So I think that the future is not about companies. The future is about communities.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and I would not have expected any less from you, Angela. Question 2.
What about you? How would you answer that?
Well, I would probably say Apple when Steve Jobs came back. I know that's pretty generic, but, they've completely revolutionized so much of what we do in that space of time. So many disruptive products that have changed the way we communicate, consume media. This podcast is going up on iTunes, and it would have been incredible to see how people came together, especially in the face of adversity. Because when Steve Jobs came back, Apple were just completely flat. Their share price was something like $10, and the Wall Street analysts basically wrote the obituary already for Apple, and to bounce back and become at one point, I think their market cap, what was it? It was something crazy like, I'm not going to say the number, but it was, I think the share price hit $1,000 at one point after that from $10. So it was absolutely insane to see that turnaround transpire. But, question number 2, if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oh, God, that's hard. I am very, Albert Einstein is on my dream team. So I would ask him what sustained his ability to be relentlessly curious. So he defines that as his genius, not his ability to create, the theorems that he created, but his ability to remain with a childlike, relentless curiosity. And how do we do that at scale so that people understand the role and the power of curiosity in not just the innovation process, but in the aliveness, the living process? So Albert Einstein.
Yep, great
I would
answer.
ask him a question about questions. How about you? How would you answer?
Oh, if I could ask anyone a question? Well, I actually, you're the second guest to ask me how I would answer that question. The last time I answered, I said Henry Ford. Because, that was at a time when the horse-drawn carriage was the default way of getting around. And, just to have that sense of self-belief and that you could, completely transform the way people get around the regulators, because for a long time their regulators mandated that cars could not travel faster than horse-drawn carriages to protect the horse-drawn carriage industry and the lobbyists. So I think self-belief and to fail and still persevere, and I think there's something very valuable, some valuable lessons to be learned in that, and to see what no one else sees. That's just... That's incredible. And let's not even talk about the assembly line that he coined. And anyway, I could go on, but I won't. Final question is on lifestyle design. So you're quite the busy bee. When you're not jet setting around the world, you're back home, and you're no doubt always trying to revolutionize education for the better. How does Angela Maiers stay on her game?
That is quite a question. I think that is a daily both challenge and opportunity. So I feel very, very passionate since I began teaching that I would never ask any learner, any student, to do what I was not willing to do myself. So the greatest challenge that I'm asking from learners is to take responsibility for their own worthiness, to understand that they do matter, and that this is not an issue of self-esteem, this is an issue of worth, and that worthiness is a daily practice. So I think the way that I stay in the game in the world is that deliberate, disciplined practice of my own worthiness to fight those sort of demons of self-doubt and the wrench of resistance and all of those things, and not see it as a selfish act to take care of myself, but as my responsibility. Because if I do not bring my full self to the world, that's not just selling myself short, it's selling the world short.
Oh, that's a great answer. And I think on self-doubt, I try to see it as a good thing, because every time you notice yourself doubting yourself, you just notice that, put some distance between it and yourself, and you end up sharpening your sword and not letting it, I suppose, overtake you and your beliefs and your behaviors. So any negative emotions can essentially be turned into a positive, so long as you notice them for what they are and don't let them take over your very being.
Ultimately, what it comes to is
You're going to face adversity and challenge if you want to achieve great things, or at least have an impact on the world. If you're not willing to embrace challenge, then you're not going to create impact. And life's too short to not to aim for the stars and at least land on the clouds, right? So.
Absolutely. Especially playing small, for sure.
Exactly. So our audience can find out a little bit more about you at angelamaiers.com. That's MAIERS.com, and choose number 2 matter.org. So choose2matter.org.
Yes.
Anywhere else they can go, or?
Just there.
Yeah.
You can just type in You Matter to Google and you'll get to all of it. If you forget all of that, just type in You Matter to Google and it'll get to all the sort of ripple of all of this.
Excellent. Love it. Any final words of wisdom for our audience, Angela?
Just those 2 words, that
You matter.
The foundation of innovation, the foundation of significance, what you were talking about, that the pursuit of your fulfillment is based on how seriously you take these 2 words. You matter. And so I challenge your community to really think about not only the last time they've heard or spoken those 2 words, but what they mean to them in their life, in their work. And I guarantee that they are 2 of the most powerful words in the universe.
Mm-hmm. No, I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Angela, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much.
Well, that's it for my chat with Angela Maiers. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. As always, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, I'd love it if you'd take just 1 minute of your time to show some love by subscribing to and giving this podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. It would mean a hell of a lot to me and the team who helped put this together, and would also help us to continue bringing you the caliber of guests that we've brought you to date. You can join the conversation on Facebook at facebook.com/Future² podcast, which is a new Facebook page I've just set up, or on LinkedIn. Or alternatively, you can subscribe to our mailing list at Future².xyz and receive all sorts of goodies and access to resources that are not available in the public domain. If you've got any questions, feel free to tweet me at Steve Glaveski, send an email to steve@collectivecamp.us, or simply hit me up on LinkedIn. As always, we've got a ton of blogs, podcasts, videos, webinars, online classes, and innovation resources, most of which are free and available for you to download today at www.collectivecamp.us. So make sure you check that out when you have a moment. Until next time, keep dreaming big. Future² out.